Have you ever wondered if the greatest threat to humanity was actually inside the ark? We have all heard the story of Noah. We picture a wooden vessel floating on a global ocean, designed by God to save the innocent. We imagine it as a sanctuary, a clean room sealed off from the corruption of the outside world. But what if the security of that room was breached before the rain even started? What if, among the 8 people who walked up that ramp, there was one passenger who was not like the others? One person who carried a biological code that God intended to wipe out. Today, we are going to reopen the oldest cold case in human history. We are going to identify the suspect who smuggled the legacy of the serpent into the New World. Open your Bible to the book of Genesis, chapter 4. At first glance, this chapter looks like standard administrative paperwork. It is a genealogy. It is a list of names belonging to the line of Cain. This is the lineage of the first murderer. It is a catalog of the men who built the violent, godless civilization that provoked the Great Flood. The text lists them one by one. Enoch, Irad, Mehujael, Methushael, and finally, Lamech. These are the fathers of rebellion. They are the architects of the world that was about to be drowned. The pattern of the text is rigid. It lists the fathers and the sons. It focuses entirely on the men who carried the seed of Cain. But then, in verse 22, something strange happens. The rhythm of the text suddenly breaks. The author, Moses, stops the list of men to insert a specific detail that seems out of place. He writes, "And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah." You need to pause right there. Ask yourself the detective question. Why is she here? In the ancient world, and specifically in biblical genealogies, women were rarely mentioned unless they played a critical role in the continuation of a bloodline. But this is the bloodline of Cain. This is the list of people scheduled for execution by water. According to the standard narrative, every single person in this lineage died in the flood. If Naamah drowned along with her brothers and her father, her name would be historically irrelevant. It would be a waste of ink. History ignores the dead who leave no legacy. So why did the Holy Spirit inspire Moses to carve her name into the eternal record? There is only one logical explanation for this forensic anomaly. Her name is recorded because her story did not end in the water. Naamah is mentioned because she survived. This small detail in Genesis 4 verse 22 is a forensic marker. It is a red flag left by the author to warn us. It suggests that while God was selecting Noah to preserve the line of righteousness, the enemy was executing a counter-strategy. The enemy needed a survivor. They needed a carrier. We have been taught that the flood washed away the lineage of Cain completely. We assume the slate was wiped clean. But the existence of giants and evil nations immediately after the flood suggests otherwise. The DNA of the rebellion found a way to cross the water. Naamah is the missing link. She is the bridge between the terrifying world of the ancients and the world we live in today. She was the daughter of the wicked Lamech. She was the sister of the man who invented weapons of war. And yet she managed to secure a place on the boat that was supposed to save humanity. She was the biological malware entering a sterile system. To understand how she did it and the terrible consequences of her survival, we must first analyze who she really was. We must look at the family she came from. We are going to analyze the DNA of the first murderer. Let us look at the lineage of blood.
To understand the severity of the biological malware that entered the ark, we cannot look at Naamah in isolation. In the world of forensics, to understand the criminal, you must analyze their environment and their origin. We need to conduct a background check on the family that produced her. Naamah was not a random peasant girl picked up from a village. She was the daughter of the most powerful and dangerous man of the pre-flood world. She was the crown jewel of a dynasty built on rebellion, bloodshed, and forbidden knowledge. Let us look at her father, Lamech. In the genealogy of Cain, Lamech is the 7th generation from Adam. In the Bible, the number 7 often represents completion or fullness. If Enoch, the 7th from Adam in the godly line, represented the fullness of righteousness, then Lamech represented the fullness of evil. He was the first man in history to pervert the institution of marriage. God established the pattern of one man and one woman. Lamech destroyed this design. He took 2 wives, Adah and Zillah. This was the birth of polygamy. It was the first step in the degradation of women and the destruction of the family unit. But Lamech was not just a destroyer of marriage. He was a killer with a conscience seared by pride. Genesis records his chilling confession, which scholars often call the Song of the Sword. He summoned his 2 wives and boasted, "I have killed the man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. If Cain shall be avenged 7-fold, truly Lamech 70 and 7-fold. This is not a confession of guilt. It is a declaration of immunity. It is the first poem in human history, and it is a glorification of murder. Lamech was telling the world that brute force was the new law. He was the king of a civilization where might makes right. This is the man who raised Naamah. This is the father who shaped her worldview. Now look at her brothers. The text tells us that Naamah had 2 half-brothers and 1 full brother. These men were the titans of the antediluvian age. They were the architects of the culture that God was preparing to destroy. First, there was Jubal. The Bible calls him the father of all such as handle the harp and organ. On the surface, this sounds innocent. We think of music as a gift. But in the context of this corrupted bloodline, Jubal was not writing worship songs for the Creator. He was engineering the entertainment industry of the ancient world. Ancient historians and Jewish commentaries suggest that Jubal used music to induce altered states of consciousness. It was a tool for idolatry. He created the frequencies and the rhythms used in the worship of fallen entities. He provided the soundtrack for the moral decay of humanity while distracting the masses with sensory pleasure while judgment approached. Then there was her full brother, Tubal-Cain. His name is synonymous with war. The Bible describes him as an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. He was the first metallurgist. Before Tubal-Cain, men worked the ground. After Tubal-Cain, men worked the forge. He took the resources of the earth and turned them into weapons. He invented the sword, the spear, and the shield. He is the father of the military-industrial complex. If Lamech brought the will to kill, Tubal-Cain provided the means to do it efficiently. He transformed murder from a crime of passion into a science of warfare. This brings us to Naamah herself. She was the daughter of the first polygamist. She was the sister of the sorcerer of sound and the master of war. What was her role in this dynasty? The Bible gives us a clue in her name. In Hebrew, Naamah means pleasant, delightful, or lovely. But do not let the softness of the name fool you. In this family, beauty was not a virtue. It was a tool. Ancient Jewish midrash and oral traditions paint a disturbing picture of this woman. They do not describe her as a homemaker. They describe her as a woman of mesmerizing, almost supernatural beauty. The Zohar and other ancient texts suggest that Naamah was so stunning that she did not just attract men, she attracted the watchers.
These texts claim that she was one of the primary women who led the sons of God astray. She was a willing participant in the interspecies mingling that produced the Nephilim. She was the siren of the Cainite civilization. Think about what she represented. She carried the genetic legacy of Lamech's arrogance. She possessed the cultural sophistication of Jubal's arts. She wielded the sharp, cold ambition of Tubal-Cain's iron, and she wrapped it all in a package of irresistible physical perfection. She was the ultimate product of a world that had rejected God. She was the pinnacle of human achievement without the spirit. While the rest of the world was descending into chaos, Naamah likely lived in luxury. She was a princess of the city of Enoch, the first city built by Cain. While Noah was out in the wilderness, building a wooden box and preaching righteousness to people who laughed at him, Naamah was likely adorned in the gold and jewelry fashioned by her brother. She was the queen of the high society that mocked the coming judgment. So here is the critical profile of our suspect. We have a woman who comes from a family of murderers, warmongers, and idolaters. A woman whose very name implies a seductive charm that could entrap angels. A woman who represents everything God decided to wash away. And yet, she is the one who survives. This raises the most uncomfortable question of our investigation. How did a woman like this end up holding the hand of Ham, the son of the most righteous man on earth? How did the daughter of Lamech infiltrate the family of Noah? It was not an accident. It was a calculated maneuver. As the clouds began to gather and the warnings of Noah started to sound less like madness and more like a prophecy, Naamah realized she needed an escape route. The ship was building and she needed a ticket. She knew she couldn't buy her way onto the ark with gold or threaten her way on with iron. She had to use the one weapon her brothers didn't have. She had to use her charm to exploit the weakest link in Noah's armor. We need to examine the marriage that sealed the fate of the post-flood world. We need to look at the infiltration.
You have to understand that the Ark of Noah was the most exclusive vessel ever constructed. It was not a cruise ship open to the public. It was a highly restricted, biosecure facility. There were only 8 tickets issued for the entire human race. 4 for the men, 4 for the women. Noah had his ticket. His wife had hers. The 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, had theirs. That left exactly 3 vacancies remaining, 3 spots for 3 daughters-in-law. This reality turned the marriage market of the antediluvian world into a high-stakes game of survival. Most of the world was eating, drinking, and marrying without a care, completely oblivious to the coming doom. But the elite knew. The family of Lamech, with their connections to the Watchers and the fallen spiritual hierarchy, likely had intelligence that the end was near. The fallen angels knew judgment was pending. Naamah, being the daughter of the High Court of Cain, would have sensed the shift in the atmosphere. She knew that her brother's swords and her father's walls could not stop a global ocean. She needed a way out. She needed a ticket to ride. This was not a romance. This was a tactical infiltration. Naamah needed to secure a position on that boat. She had to target one of the 3 sons of Noah. But which one? A predator always looks for the wounded, the isolated, or the curious. Shem was likely too disciplined. He was the spiritual successor to Noah, deeply entrenched in the ways of righteousness. Japheth, often considered the eldest or the one most content, was perhaps too steady. But then there was Ham. When we analyze the psychological profile of Ham based on his later actions in the Bible, a clear pattern of character flaws emerges. Ham is the one who, after the flood, disrespects his father.
In Genesis chapter 9, when Noah lies uncovered in his tent, Ham is the one who looks. He violates the boundaries of privacy and honor. He has a voyeuristic tendency. He has a curiosity for the forbidden. He is drawn to the nakedness of things that should remain covered. Naamah, with her sharp intuition, would have spotted this weakness from a mile away. Ham was the weak link in the chain of righteousness. He was the young man who perhaps felt stifled by his father's endless preaching and boat building. Imagine the contrast. Noah's family lived a life of separation. They were likely agrarian, simple, pious, and to a young man with a wandering eye, probably incredibly dull. They represented the old ways of Seth. On the other hand, Naamah represented the glittering, neon-lit metropolis of the Cainites. She was the personification of the world. She came from the city of heavy metal, of loud music, of technological marvels. She carried the scent of exotic perfumes and wore the intricate jewelry fashioned by Tubal-Cain. She wore the makeup that the book of Enoch tells us the fallen angels taught women to use to seduce men. She was sophisticated, dangerous, and incredibly exciting. For a young man like Ham, who perhaps felt stifled by his father's endless preaching and boat building, Naamah was not just a woman, she was an adventure. She was a window into the life he felt he was missing out on. She was the forbidden fruit hanging low on the tree. The infiltration strategy was simple but devastating. Naamah did not need to conquer Noah. She only needed to captivate Ham. She used the very weapons her lineage was famous for: beauty, seduction, the allure of the superior culture. She likely played the role of the damsel in distress, or perhaps the misunderstood intellectual who wanted to escape the brutality of her father's house. She would have told Ham whatever he needed to hear to convince him that she was different from the rest of her wicked family. We can assume there was a conflict. Noah, being a prophet and a man who walked with God, surely would have had reservations about a woman from the line of Cain entering his camp. But Noah was a father, not a tyrant. He could build an ark to withstand a storm, but he could not build a wall around his son's heart. If Ham was infatuated, if Ham insisted that she was the one, Noah may have allowed the marriage, hoping that the influence of his household would sanctify her. It is a mistake that righteous parents have made for thousands of years. They think their environment changes the person, not realizing the person can infect the environment. This was the blindness of the righteous. Ham was blinded by lust and curiosity. Noah was perhaps blinded by hope or paternal leniency. And in that blind spot, the enemy made his move. The wedding took place, the vows were exchanged. And with that covenant, the bloodline of Cain, which God was preparing to erase from the face of the earth, was legally and spiritually grafted into the family of the survivor. Naamah walked into the camp of Noah not as a convert, but as a sleeper agent. She brought her baggage with her. We are not talking about physical luggage, although she certainly brought the artifacts of her culture. We are talking about genetic and spiritual baggage. She carried the memories of the idolatrous rites of her brother Jubal. She carried the aggressive ambition of her brother Tubal-Cain. And most terrifying of all, she carried the biological coding in her womb that would eventually give birth to the nations that would plague Israel for centuries. It is chilling to imagine the scene as the animals began to arrive and the door of the ark was prepared to shut. 7 people walked up that ramp out of obedience and faith, but the 8th person, Naamah, likely walked up that ramp with a secret smirk of victory. She had beaten the system. The storm was coming to destroy the wicked, but the wicked were already on board. The infiltration was a complete success. The clean room was compromised before the first drop of rain ever fell. Now,
As the waters rise and the world screams in agony outside, we must turn our attention to what happened inside that vessel. The ark was designed to preserve life, but for the next year it would incubate a nightmare. Let us step inside the ark and examine the carrier.
Imagine the sound of the world ending. For 40 days and 40 nights, the sky collapsed into the ocean. The fountains of the great deep burst open. Outside the pitch-covered walls of the ark, the pressure was crushing. Every city, every tower, every garden, and every living thing that breathed air was being pulverized by the hydraulic force of God's judgment. The purpose of this cataclysm was sterilization. The earth had been infected by a genetic and spiritual plague. The Watchers had corrupted the human genome. The Nephilim had filled the land with violence. The flood was a global fumigation designed to wipe out the infection and reset the system. The ark, floating on this ocean of death, was a clean room. It was a biosecure quarantine zone intended to carry the pure genetic stock of humanity into a new age. Noah was perfect in his generations. His DNA was uncorrupted. But here is the terrifying reality. The ark was sterile, but one of the passengers was not. While the storm raged outside, a different kind of danger was sitting quietly in the corner of the vessel. Naamah was the carrier. In the language of modern virology, she was an asymptomatic carrier. On the surface, she looked like a normal woman. She had the height of a human. She had the features of a human. But deep inside her cellular structure, hidden within the double helix of her DNA, lay the dormant code of the serpent. We must understand the science of the recessive gene. You can carry a trait without displaying it. You can carry the gene for blue eyes, even if your eyes are brown. In the same way, Naamah carried the recessive gene of the giant. She was the granddaughter of Lamech and the descendant of Cain. Some interpretations of the Serpent Seed theory suggest that the bloodline of Cain itself was hybridized from the very beginning. Whether through direct lineage or through the intermingling with the fallen ones in the days of Jared, the code was there. In her womb, Naamah held the biological blueprint for the Rephaim, the Anakim, and the Philistines. She was a genetic time bomb. While Noah was feeding the lions and Shem was tending to the birds, Naamah was preserving the heritage of the Antichrist spirit. She was the bridge over the water. The flood could destroy the giants walking on the earth, but it could not destroy the instructions for making giants that were hidden inside her eggs. Let us visualize the psychological atmosphere inside that boat. It must have been suffocating. For over a year, 8 people were locked together. Noah and his family likely spent hours in prayer, weeping for the world that was lost and thanking Yahweh for their salvation. They were humble. They were broken. But Naamah, I want you to picture her in the shadows. She probably did not pray. Why would she pray to a God who had just drowned her entire family? Why would she worship the deity who destroyed the magnificent cities her brothers built? Her silence was not humility. It was a cold, simmering resentment. She was the only one on that boat who missed the old world. While Noah looked forward to a new beginning, Naamah was mourning the loss of the darkness. And she did not just bring her genetics, she brought contraband. When a refugee flees a war zone, they sew their most precious valuables into the lining of their coats. What did Naamah bring? She would have carried the jewelry fashioned by Tubal-Cain, the gold and silver that represented the economy of Babylon. But more dangerously, she likely carried the gods of her father. Small teraphim, idols carved from stone or wood, little statues representing the Watchers. She would have hidden them in the folds of her garments, just as Rachel would hide her father's idols centuries later. These were not just trinkets. These were spiritual portals. They were the seeds of idolatry. By bringing these objects onto the ark, she ensured that the demons of the old world would have a legal landing strip in the new one. Ham, her husband, was oblivious. He looked at her and saw a beautiful wife. He did not realize he was sleeping next to the enemy. He did not know that his union with her was the mechanism that would pollute the new earth. He was the host, and she was the pathogen. This is the irony of the ark. We teach our children that it was a boat of salvation, and it was, but it was also a transport vessel for the ultimate evil. God allowed it. Just as he allowed the serpent into the Garden of Eden, he allowed Naamah onto the ark. Perhaps it is because evil must always be a choice, not just an impossibility. Or perhaps it is to show that no wooden box can save us if the heart is not changed. As the waters began to recede and the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat, the clean room was about to open. The door that God had shut was about to be unsealed. The animals would rush out to repopulate the earth. Noah would step out to build an altar, and Naamah would step out to build a monster. The incubation period was over. The outbreak was about to begin. The quarantine was lifted, the ark rested on Ararat, and the 8 survivors stepped out into a silent, empty world. For a moment, it seemed like the plan had worked. The violence of the old world was buried under miles of sediment. The screams of the giants were silenced. The genetic slate was wiped clean. Or so it seemed. But biology is patient. It waits. And in the tent of Ham, the dormant code that Naamah had carried across the floodwaters began to wake up. She gave birth to a son. His name was Canaan. In the annals of our investigation, we must designate this child as Patient Zero. He was the first carrier of the reactivated virus in the post-flood world. To understand the tragedy of Canaan, we must look at the most confusing legal verdict in the Bible. The incident is recorded in Genesis chapter 9. Noah plants a vineyard, drinks the wine, and falls asleep naked in his tent. Ham, the husband of Naamah, enters the tent and sees his father's nakedness. He goes out and tells his 2 brothers. When Noah wakes up and realizes what Ham has done, he pronounces a curse. But he does not curse Ham. He says, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brethren." For centuries, theologians have struggled with this. Why curse the son for the sin of the father? It seems like a miscarriage of justice. But if we view this through the lens of genetics and the serpent seed, the picture becomes terrifyingly clear. Noah was not just a drunk old man waking up from a nap. He was a prophet. He was the man who had seen the face of pure evil in the days before the flood. When Noah looked at his grandson, Canaan, he did not just see a child, he saw a resemblance. He saw the physical traits of the people God had destroyed. He saw the glint in the eye that belonged to Lamech. He saw the unnatural stature that belonged to the Nephilim. Noah realized in that moment of horror that the infection had breached the ark. He did not curse Ham because Ham was merely the foolish conduit. He cursed Canaan because Canaan was the result. The curse was not an act of anger, it was an attempt at containment. Noah was declaring that this lineage, this genetic anomaly, must be kept in subjection. It must be a servant of servants. Because if it is allowed to rule, it will consume the world again. The history of the Old Testament proves that Noah was right. Look at what crawled out of the gene pool of Canaan. This is not speculation. This is geography and genealogy. The sons of Canaan became the tribes that would terrorize the Promised Land for generations. Canaan begot the Jebusites, who held Jerusalem with fortified walls. He begot the Amorites, whom the prophet Amos described as having the height of cedars and the strength of oaks. He begat the Girgashites and the Hivites. And most critically, the land of Canaan became the breeding ground for the Anakim. When Moses sent the 12 spies into the land of Canaan centuries later, what did they find?
they did not find normal humans. In Numbers chapter 13, the spies came back shaking in terror. They reported, "We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Enoch come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." Where did these giants come from? The text says they were there after the flood. Many theories suggest a second incursion of angels falling from the sky. But the Bible never records a second fall. It never mentions angels coming down again. We do not need a second invasion from the sky to explain the giants. We only need a successful smuggler. The giants returned because Naamah succeeded. The genetic code for the Anakim was hidden in her ovaries. It bypassed the floodwaters. It skipped a generation in Ham, or perhaps expressed itself mildly, but it exploded in full force in the line of Canaan. The giant Goliath, whom David fought, was a descendant of this line. The brothers of Goliath, who had 6 fingers and 6 toes, were walking evidence of a corrupted genome. This changes everything about how we view the wars of Israel. When God commanded Joshua to wipe out the Canaanites, to destroy every man, woman, and child, it seems cruel to modern eyes. But if you understand that these tribes were the resurgence of the biological malware, the command becomes a necessity. It was a continuation of the flood. God was trying to finish the sterilization process that Naamah had sabotaged. Naamah had done her job. She had preserved the legacy of her father Lamech. She ensured that the seed of the serpent would have a fighting chance in the new world. She was the mother of monsters. And as the tribes of Canaan spread out and built their cities, the spirit of the pre-flood world began to rise again. The infection was no longer contained. It was an outbreak. And now, we must look at the world we live in today. Because the spirit of Naamah did not die with the Canaanites. It evolved. It built a new Babylon. We need to conclude our investigation by looking in the mirror. Let us uncover the modern face of this ancient deception.
The investigation leads us to a terrifying conclusion. We often look at the story of the flood as ancient history, a dusty chapter from a forgotten age. But look out your window. Look at the world we live in right now. We are not living in the world of Noah. We are living in the world of Naamah. The civilization that God drowned has been reconstructed, brick by brick. The spirit of the Cainite line did not die in the water. It survived in the heart of the woman who walked off the boat, and it has spent the last 4,000 years rebuilding its empire. Analyze the pillars of our modern society. Who rules us? We are ruled by the legacy of Naamah's brothers. Her brother Tubal-Cain, the father of weapons and industry, is the patron saint of our military-industrial complex. We spend trillions of dollars forging sharper swords and deadlier missiles, just as he did. We worship technology and steel. We believe that our salvation comes from the strength of our hands and the power of our machines. Her brother Jubal, the father of the harp and organ, is the spirit behind our global obsession with entertainment. We are a species addicted to distraction. We are constantly plugged into frequencies and rhythms that alter our mood and shape our culture. Just as in the days before the flood, music and media are used to seduce the masses into a state of spiritual stupor. And then there is Naamah herself. Her name means pleasant. Her name means beautiful. And today, beauty is our highest god. We live in a culture obsessed with the external. We filter our faces, we modify our bodies. We worship the aesthetic while our souls rot on the inside. We have built a civilization that looks good on the outside, but is filled with dead men's bones on the inside. This is the spirit of Naamah. It is beauty masking destruction. She represents the ultimate deception. She proves that evil does not always arrive with horns and fire. Sometimes evil arrives with a smile. Sometimes the thing that will destroy you is the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. Ham did not fall for a monster. He fell for a princess. He fell for the allure of the world, thinking he could handle it. He thought he could bring a little bit of the Cainite culture onto the ark and keep it under control. He was wrong. This is the warning for every single one of us today. We are all captains of our own ark. We are all trying to navigate through a world that is drowning in sin. We try to keep our families and our minds safe in a clean room, but we must be vigilant. We must ask ourselves the hard question: who have we let on board? What stowaways are hiding in the cargo hold of your life? Is it a secret sin that you think is small enough to manage? Is it a fascination with the dark side of culture that you think is just harmless entertainment? Is it a relationship that pulls you away from the truth? Remember, it only took one passenger to infect the new world. It only took one recessive gene to bring back the giants. You cannot compromise with the DNA of the serpent. You cannot make a treaty with the line of Cain. If you give the enemy a seat at your table, he will eventually take over the whole house. The story of Naamah is a forensic evidence file that screams a warning across the centuries. It tells us that the physical flood is over, but the spiritual flood is still rising. The waters of deception are higher than the mountains. The giants are back, not just in the land of Canaan, but in our governments, our media, and our schools. Do not be blinded by the beauty of Babylon. Do not be seduced by the pleasantness of Naamah. Dig deeper. Look at the roots. Test the spirits. We are the seekers of truth. We are the ones who refuse to accept the official narrative without questioning the evidence. We uncover what has been hidden so that we can survive what is coming. If you want to continue this investigation with us, if you want to peel back the layers of history and expose the shadows, make sure you are subscribed. Join us as we continue to shine a light into the dark corners of the ancient world. The floodwaters have receded, but the investigation is just beginning. Stay watchful, stay awake, and never let the passenger take the wheel.